Introduction. The prison nobody sees. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of human life is not that we suffer. It is that we often do not understand why we suffer. We search for happiness. We search for peace. We search for meaning. We search for freedom. And yet, despite all our efforts, something remains missing. A strange dissatisfaction follows us. A subtle restlessness. A feeling that life could be richer, deeper, more alive than it currently is. Many people spend decades chasing success, security, relationships, recognition, and achievement, believing that the next milestone will finally bring fulfillment. But sooner or later, an uncomfortable question appears. Why does satisfaction disappear so quickly? Why does every destination seem to become another starting point? Why do so many people achieve what they once dreamed of, only to discover that the hunger remains? There is a hidden reason. A reason most people never see. Not because it is difficult to understand, but because it is hidden in plain sight. It is so close to us that we rarely think to question it. Like a fish unaware of the water surrounding it. Like a bird born inside a cage that mistakes the cage for the whole sky. From childhood we are taught what to believe. We are taught who to become. We are taught what success looks like. What failure means. What is acceptable. What is dangerous. What is sacred. What is forbidden. And because these ideas arrive early, we rarely stop to examine them. We simply inherit them. We carry them. We defend them. Sometimes we even build our identity around them. But what if some of the things we call freedom are actually forms of captivity? What if some of the things we call security are preventing us from truly living? What if many of the answers we have accepted are the very things preventing us from discovering truth? This book is not an attack on religion. Nor is it an argument for disbelief. It is something far more dangerous than either. It is an invitation to look. To look honestly. To look courageously. To look without the comfort of ready-made conclusions. Because truth is rarely discovered by those who already believe they possess it. Truth reveals itself to those who are willing to explore. In the chapters ahead, we will encounter invisible prisons. Prisons built from belief. Prisons built from imitation. Prisons built from fear. Prisons built from the desire to belong. Prisons built from the need for certainty. And perhaps the most surprising discovery of all. Many of these prisons have no guards. The doors are often open. Yet we remain inside. You will meet strange characters along the way. A city of people who sacrificed parts of themselves in the name of virtue. A bird that cries for freedom while clinging desperately to its cage. A craftsman imprisoned by chains he forged with his own hands. A traveler searching for truth in places where truth can never be found. These stories are not really about them. They are about us. They are mirrors. And if you look carefully enough, you may recognize parts of yourself within them. This journey will ask you to question things that may have felt unquestionable. Not so that you can adopt new beliefs, but so that you can begin seeing directly. Because borrowed answers can comfort the mind. Only direct seeing can transform a life. And transformation is what this book is truly about. Not becoming somebody else. Not becoming more impressive. Not becoming more acceptable. But becoming fully alive. Fully awake. Fully yourself. There is something extraordinary hidden within every human being. A possibility. A fragrance. A flowering waiting to happen. Very few people ever discover it. Not because it is unavailable, but because they remain occupied with things that are smaller. They spend their lives decorating their cages rather than exploring the sky. If you listen carefully, you may begin to notice something as we move forward. The goal of this book is not to give you more beliefs. It is to remove what stands between you and your own experience. Not to fill your hands, but to empty them. Not to provide certainty, but to awaken intelligence. Not to tell you what truth is, but to help you discover it for yourself. And perhaps that discovery is closer than you think. Perhaps what you have been seeking has never been far away. Perhaps it has been patiently waiting behind layers of conditioning, fear, imitation, and borrowed certainty. Waiting for the moment you become willing to see. Waiting for the moment you become willing to question. Waiting for the moment you become willing to step beyond the invisible prison. Because beyond that prison lies something remarkable. A freedom that cannot be given by others. A peace that cannot be purchased. A truth that cannot be borrowed. And a life that can finally flower into its fullest possibility. So before we begin, I invite you to set aside, just for a little while, everything you think you know. Do not believe what follows. Do not reject it either. Simply explore. Simply observe. Simply remain open. For the real journey is about to begin. And what you discover may change the way you see yourself, your life, and the entire mystery of existence. Chapter 1. The City of Missing Pieces. There is a question that hides quietly beneath almost every human life. A question few people ask directly. Yet millions spend their entire lives trying to answer. Why do so many people feel incomplete? Why does modern life offer more comfort, more convenience, more entertainment, more information than any previous age in history? And yet so many people carry a silent exhaustion they cannot explain. Why do people achieve success and still feel restless? Why do they gain approval and still feel unseen? Why do they spend years trying to become better versions of themselves? Only to discover that something essential has been left behind? The answer begins with a strange story. Not because the story is true in a historical sense, but because it reveals a truth hidden inside almost every society, every institution, and perhaps even every human mind. Imagine a young ruler who grows up hearing whispers about a remarkable city. The stories follow him throughout childhood. Travelers speak of it with awe. Teachers mention it with admiration. Poets celebrate it. Philosophers point toward it. According to legend, there exists somewhere in the world a city unlike any other. A city filled entirely with virtuous people. A city where nobody strays from the right path. A city where every citizen lives according to the highest ideals imaginable. As the years pass, the mystery grows larger. The young ruler becomes fascinated. How could such a place exist? How could thousands of ordinary people all live in perfect harmony with virtue? What secret had they discovered that the rest of humanity had missed? Eventually, curiosity becomes stronger than comfort. And curiosity, when it becomes strong enough, has a strange power. It pulls people beyond the borders of familiar maps. So the young ruler gathers several trusted companions and begins a long journey. Across mountains. Across rivers. Across crowded cities glowing with ambition. Across deserts where silence seems older than history itself. Months become years. Many times they hear rumors. Many times they think they are close. Many times they discover they were chasing shadows. Yet something keeps calling them forward. Because deep inside every human being lives the hope that somewhere, somehow, someone has discovered the secret of living well. Perhaps you know that feeling. The feeling that there must be an answer. That there must be a way to live without constant conflict. Without anxiety pulling in one direction and desire pulling in another. Without feeling divided against yourself. Then one morning, after countless miles of searching, they finally arrive. The city stands before them. Quiet. Orderly. Beautiful in a way that feels almost unnatural. For a moment, the young ruler feels excitement rush through him. After all these years, he has found it. The legendary city. The place everyone admired. The place everyone praised. The place where virtue supposedly flourished. But within minutes, something feels wrong. Very wrong. At first he cannot identify it. His eyes notice it before his mind understands it. The streets are crowded. People are everywhere. Children play. Merchants work. Families move through the marketplace. Yet something is missing. Something impossible to ignore. The people are not whole. Some are missing an eye. Others are missing a hand. Others carry visible signs of self-inflicted injury. And the deeper he travels into the city, the more disturbing the pattern becomes. This is not an exception. It is the rule. Almost everyone bears the same marks. Almost everyone is incomplete. Almost everyone has sacrificed some part of themselves. The mystery deepens. What happened here? Was there a disaster? A disease? A war? An ancient curse? The explanation, however, is far stranger. Above the city's gate are written a series of sacred instructions. Instructions the citizens consider unquestionable. Instructions they have followed for generations. Literally. Without interpretation. Without understanding. Without reflection. If a part of you leads you astray, remove it. If something within you causes temptation, eliminate it. If a part of your nature appears dangerous, cut it away. And so they did. Generation after generation. With complete sincerity. With total obedience. With absolute devotion. Until eventually the city became exactly what it is now. A place filled with people who had spent their lives removing pieces of themselves. Believing that holiness could be achieved through subtraction. Believing that goodness required self-mutilation. Believing that perfection meant becoming smaller. And here is where the story becomes truly interesting. Because the city is not merely a city. It is a mirror. A mirror reflecting something humanity has been doing for centuries. Perhaps longer. The names change. The costumes change. The institutions change. But the pattern remains surprisingly familiar. People are taught to distrust parts of themselves. To suppress rather than understand. To condemn rather than explore. To amputate rather than integrate. One culture attacks desire. Another attacks emotion. Another attacks ambition. Another attacks individuality. Another attacks vulnerability. Each believes it is removing the problem. Yet something important is happening beneath the surface. Every time a person is taught to reject a part of their humanity, they become slightly divided against themselves. And a divided person can never experience deep peace. Because peace is not created by winning a war against yourself. Peace emerges when the war ends. Few people realize how much suffering begins here. A child learns that certain emotions are unacceptable. So those emotions disappear from awareness. Not from existence. Only from awareness. A teenager learns that certain dreams are impractical. So those dreams are buried. Not destroyed. Only buried. An adult learns that success requires becoming someone else. So authenticity is traded for approval. Not consciously. Gradually. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Until one day they wake up feeling disconnected from their own life. Unable to explain why. This hidden fragmentation may be one of the greatest sources of modern unhappiness. People think they are searching for confidence, or purpose, or financial freedom, or better relationships. Those things matter. But often they are searching for something deeper. They are searching for the missing pieces of themselves. The parts abandoned years ago. The parts judged. The parts hidden. The parts sacrificed to fit someone else's definition of who they should be. And this creates a painful paradox. The more people try to become perfect, the further they move from becoming whole. The young ruler understands this instinctively. Standing before the city gate, he makes an unexpected decision. He does not enter. Not because he rejects virtue. Not because he rejects wisdom. But because he recognizes a dangerous misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that changes everything. He sees that these people have confused wholeness with obedience. They have confused self-understanding with self-punishment. They have confused transformation with self-destruction. And the difference between those things is enormous. One creates freedom. The other creates suffering. One expands life. The other shrinks it. One produces wisdom. The other produces fear. So he turns away. His companions stare at him in confusion. After years of searching, how could he leave now? How could he abandon the city everyone admired? His answer is simple. A person who has lost parts of themselves cannot become truly complete. No matter how noble the reason. And perhaps that single realization contains more wisdom than all the city's rules combined. Yet the story does not end there. Because the city exists in more places than we think. It exists inside cultures. Inside institutions. Inside families. Inside schools. Inside workplaces. Sometimes it even exists inside our own minds. The most important question is not whether we have visited such a city. The question is whether we have unknowingly built one within ourselves. And if we have, how do we find our way back to wholeness? The answer is far different than most people imagine. In fact, the next piece of this puzzle challenges one of the deepest assumptions humanity has ever made about growth, success, and the nature of transformation itself. And that is where the real journey begins. Chapter 2. The cage that calls itself freedom. There is something more dangerous than a prison. A prison that disguises itself as freedom. A prison decorated with noble words. A prison praised by society. A prison inherited through generations. A prison so familiar that those living inside it never think to question it. And that is where the human story becomes fascinating. For many people spend their entire lives searching for freedom while unknowingly strengthening the walls that confine them. At the end of our previous journey, we encountered a city of missing pieces. A place where people sacrificed parts of themselves in pursuit of virtue. They believed that becoming smaller would make them better. They believed that denying parts of their humanity would bring them closer to truth. Yet beyond that city lies a deeper mystery. Why do intelligent people surrender their freedom? Why do they accept limitations that diminish them? Why do they cling to systems that quietly drain their vitality? To understand this, we must begin with an ancient story. According to legend, a giant once lived beside a lonely mountain road. Near his dwelling stood a bed. It appeared ordinary. Yet it carried a terrible purpose. Every traveler who passed was forced to lie upon it. If the traveler was shorter than the bed, the giant stretched them. If the traveler was longer, he cut away whatever extended beyond its limits. No one ever fit perfectly. The bed remained unchanged. The travelers paid the price. At first glance, the story seems absurd. Why would anyone force living human beings to fit the dimensions of a bed? Yet humanity has spent centuries doing exactly that. The bed was never really a bed. It was a symbol. A symbol of rigid beliefs. Fixed expectations. Artificial ideals. Narrow definitions of success. Whenever such patterns become sacred, people are asked to reshape themselves to fit them. If your dreams are too large, reduce them. If your questions are uncomfortable, silence them. If your individuality stands out, hide it. The tragedy is subtle. No one openly says, destroy yourself. Instead they say, become better. But improvement is not the same as conformity. Growth is not the same as self-denial. Wisdom is not the same as obedience. Yet millions spend their lives confusing these very different paths. Slowly they drift away from their authentic nature. Their creativity weakens. Their curiosity fades. Their vitality diminishes. Life becomes respectable and predictable. But something essential goes missing. Perhaps you have met such people. Perhaps at times you have been one of them. They followed every rule. Made every responsible choice. Built the life they were expected to build. Collected the symbols of achievement. Yet beneath the surface remains a quiet restlessness. A question that refuses to disappear. Is this really what I was meant for? That question is often the beginning of awakening. The first crack in an invisible prison. To understand what that awakening means, we must leave the giant behind and turn toward another image. A river. Imagine a river born high in the mountains. At first it is only a small stream. Fragile. Uncertain. Barely visible. No map guides it. No authority directs it. Yet it continues moving. Learning. Exploring. The river does not know every turn ahead. It simply trusts the movement of life. Every obstacle teaches it something. Every curve reshapes it. Every challenge deepens it. And because it continues flowing, it grows stronger. Wider. More alive. More capable of nourishing everything it touches. Now imagine building walls around that river. Controlling every movement. Eliminating every uncertainty. Forcing it into rigid boundaries. At first this appears sensible. Orderly. Predictable. Safe. But gradually something begins to die. The freshness disappears. The movement slows. The living energy fades. What once danced becomes stagnant. What once explored becomes trapped. What once moved toward the sea becomes isolated from its destiny. The same thing happens within human beings. Life is movement. Consciousness is movement. Growth is movement. Whenever movement stops, decay quietly begins. People may continue working, earning, and achieving. Yet inwardly they become disconnected from the living current of existence. They survive. But they no longer feel fully alive. And perhaps this explains why so many people feel exhausted despite living in an age of unprecedented comfort. What they miss is not another possession. It is the experience of flowing again. The experience of becoming. The experience of discovering who they are beyond the walls that have been built around them. This leads us to one of life's greatest paradoxes. People long for freedom. They celebrate it and dream about it. Yet when genuine freedom appears, many become afraid. Because freedom brings uncertainty. Freedom demands awareness. Freedom requires responsibility. Most of all, freedom asks a question many would rather avoid. What will you become when nobody is telling you who to be? For many, that question is more frightening than any prison. A story illustrates this perfectly. A traveler once arrived at a remote mountain inn after a long journey. As he approached, he heard a voice echoing through the valleys. The cry was filled with emotion. Again and again the same word rang through the mountains. Freedom! 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 The traveler was deeply moved. Surely some prisoner was trapped nearby. Surely someone was suffering. The voice carried such longing that he could not ignore it. When he reached the inn, however, he discovered something unexpected. The voice belonged not to a person but to a parrot locked inside a cage. The bird's cries were so desperate that the traveler immediately felt compassion. Having experienced hardship himself, he understood the pain of confinement. And so he made a decision. That very night he would set the bird free. After midnight, when everyone was asleep, he quietly approached the cage. Slowly he opened the door. The sky was open. The stars were waiting. Freedom had arrived. Yet the bird did not move. Instead it gripped the bars even more tightly. And cried louder than before. Freedom! 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 The traveler stared in disbelief. The prison was open. Nothing prevented escape. Yet the bird refused to leave. Thinking the bird might be frightened, he gently reached inside. The bird resisted. It fought him. It clung desperately to the cage. But eventually he succeeded in carrying it outside and releasing it into the vast night sky. Satisfied, he returned to bed. Believing he had helped a captive creature find freedom. The next morning he rushed outside. What he saw astonished him. The bird had returned. The door remained open. Freedom remained possible. Yet there it was. Exactly where it had always been. Still crying for freedom. Still longing for liberation. Still refusing to leave. The old innkeeper smiled when he saw the traveler's confusion. "You are not the first person to free that bird," he said. "Many travelers have tried. Every time it returns." Then he added quietly. "The bird is not unusual. Most people do exactly the same thing." Those words reveal one of the deepest truths about human nature. People often cling to the very things that imprison them. They complain about exhausting lives while defending the habits that created them. They complain about fear while protecting the beliefs that sustain it. They complain about emptiness while refusing opportunities for change. Not because they are weak. Not because they are foolish. But because familiarity feels safe. Even suffering can become comfortable when it is familiar enough. The cage becomes home. The chains become identity. And eventually the prison becomes invisible. Perhaps this is why genuine transformation is so rare. The greatest barriers are rarely outside us. More often they live within. They are built from assumptions, fears, conditioning, stories repeated so many times that they begin to feel like reality itself. We inherit them from parents, from culture, from institutions. And eventually we stop questioning them. We mistake them for truth. Just as a lie repeated often enough can appear convincing, a limitation repeated long enough can feel natural. The cage disappears from sight, but its influence remains. This raises a profound question. How do we recognize a prison when it feels like home? How do we identify chains that have become part of our identity? Because the strongest cage is not the one that confines the body. It is the one that quietly teaches the mind to stop searching beyond its walls. Until that invisible cage is seen, freedom remains only an idea. But the moment it is seen, something extraordinary becomes possible. A doorway begins to open. And through it waits the next stage of our journey. The hidden architecture of belief, where every prison is first constructed and where every true liberation begins. Chapter 3. The Invisible Chains of Belief. A prison made of stone can be seen. A prison made of iron can be touched. A prison made of walls can be escaped. But there is another kind of prison. One so subtle that most people spend their entire lives inside it without ever realizing it exists. It has no gates. No guards. No locks. No visible chains. Yet its power is greater than all of them combined. Because this prison is built inside the mind. In the previous chapter, we encounter the parrot that cried endlessly for freedom while clinging desperately to the bars of its cage. The story seemed absurd. Yet the more carefully we examine human life, the less absurd it becomes. For people often do the same thing. They long for freedom while protecting the beliefs that confine them. They dream of truth while resisting the very questions that might reveal it. They search for open skies while refusing to release the bars they have held for years. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this. Many do not even know they are holding them. There are always those who benefit from such blindness. The owner of a caged bird does not want the bird to discover the open sky. A person who profits from dependence rarely encourages independence. And throughout history, some of the most powerful forms of control have not been exercised over the human body. They have been exercised over the human mind. A body can be imprisoned while the spirit remains free. History is filled with people who sat behind walls yet dreamed beyond horizons. Their bodies were confined. Their imagination was not. Their circumstances were limited. Their consciousness was not. But when the mind itself becomes imprisoned, the situation changes completely. Then the cage travels everywhere with the prisoner. This is why the most powerful chains are invisible. They are woven from ideas, assumptions, conditioning, beliefs accepted without examination. And among all these invisible chains, one stands above the rest. Belief itself. For thousands of years, humanity has repeated the same instruction to each new generation. Believe. Believe what you are told. Believe what your ancestors believed. Believe what your community believes. Believe what your leaders believe. Believe first. Question later. Or better yet, never question at all. This message is often presented as wisdom. But what if it is something else entirely? What if unquestioning belief is the foundation of the very prison we seek to escape? Consider the difference between belief and inquiry. Belief says, accept. Inquiry says, investigate. Belief says, do not doubt. Inquiry says, doubt carefully and see what remains. Belief seeks certainty. Inquiry seeks understanding. And these two paths move in opposite directions. The believer is eager to arrive. The seeker is willing to travel. The believer wants answers. The seeker wants truth. And truth is rarely discovered by those unwilling to question. Yet belief has one great advantage. It is easy. It asks almost nothing of us. Someone says, this is true. And we accept it. Someone says, this is the way. And we follow. No struggle. No uncertainty. No exploration. The burden of thinking is handed to someone else. For many people, this feels comforting. But comfort and truth are not always the same thing. Look around the world. Countless groups disagree with one another. Different religions. Different ideologies. Different philosophies. Different systems of thought. They argue endlessly about what is true. Yet beneath their disagreements lies a surprising point of agreement. All of them encourage belief. The content changes. The method remains. One says, believe this. Another says, believe that. The labels differ. The demand is the same. And so people spend their lives arguing over the color of the blindfold rather than questioning why they are wearing one at all. Imagine a person with a red cloth covering their eyes. Beside them stands another wearing blue. A third wears green. They argue passionately. Each insists their color is superior. Each believes the others are mistaken. Yet none of them can see. The problem is not the color. The problem is the blindfold itself. And belief, when accepted without understanding, often functions in exactly the same way. This is why genuine thought can be so disruptive. Thinking is not merely collecting information. It is not repeating what others have said. It is not memorizing conclusions. Real thinking is an act of courage. Because every genuine question challenges something familiar. Every honest investigation threatens an old certainty. Every fresh insight requires the death of a previous illusion. And that process can be uncomfortable. The structures that depend upon obedience understand this very well. They do not fear agreement. They do not fear disagreement. What they fear is independent thought. Because thought contains the seed of transformation. A person who thinks deeply eventually begins questioning inherited assumptions. A person who questions assumptions eventually begins seeing contradictions. A person who sees contradictions eventually begins changing. And change is difficult to control. An old story illustrates this perfectly. A philosopher once stopped at a village oil mill. As he waited, he noticed something curious. A large ox walked in endless circles, turning the heavy machinery. Yet there was no one guiding it. No driver. No overseer. No master holding a rope. Still the animal continued walking. Round and round. Hour after hour. The philosopher watched for some time before asking the owner a question. "This is remarkable," he said. "Your ox appears extraordinarily obedient. No one is directing it, yet it continues working." The miller laughed. "Look more carefully." The philosopher stepped closer. Only then did he notice a cloth tied across the animal's eyes. The ox could not see. It had no idea whether anyone stood behind it or not. "Ah," said the philosopher. "Now I understand." But after a moment he added, "What if the ox stops walking?" The miller smiled. "It cannot stop without my knowing." He pointed toward a small bell hanging around the animal's neck. "As long as it moves, the bell rings. If it stops, the sound disappears. Then I come and encourage it to continue." The philosopher considered this. Then another thought occurred to him. What if the ox stands still and simply shakes its head? The bell would continue ringing. The miller's smile disappeared. For a moment he looked genuinely concerned. Then he folded his hands and said, "My friend, please leave immediately." The philosopher was puzzled. "Why?" The miller lowered his voice. "Because if my ox hears such ideas, it may become dangerous." The humor of the story hides a profound truth. Systems of control rarely want questioning. They depend upon routine. They depend upon habit. They depend upon people continuing to walk in circles without asking where the road leads. The moment genuine inquiry begins, the entire arrangement becomes unstable. Because questions create openings. And openings allow light to enter. Perhaps this is why so many institutions throughout history have preferred obedience over understanding. Understanding creates independent minds. Independent minds create unpredictable outcomes. And unpredictability threatens established structures. But life itself is unpredictable. Growth is unpredictable. Discovery is unpredictable. The universe does not reveal its mysteries to those who refuse to question. This does not mean every belief is false. Nor does it mean every tradition is without value. The issue is not what we believe. The issue is whether we have examined what we believe. Whether we have seen it directly. Whether it comes from experience rather than repetition. Because borrowed truth is not truth. It is merely information. And information can never transform a human being the way direct understanding can. Most people inherit their beliefs the way they inherit language. Without choosing. Without investigating. Without awareness. And because those beliefs arrive early, they become invisible. Like air. Like water to a fish. They shape perception while remaining unnoticed. Yet the unseen often exerts the greatest influence. So the first step toward freedom is not rebellion. It is awareness. Not rejecting every belief. Not accepting every belief. But observing. Questioning. Investigating. Learning to see clearly. Because the moment a person begins seeing clearly, something remarkable happens. The prison door that once seemed solid begins to look uncertain. The chains begin to weaken. The walls become transparent. And for the first time, freedom no longer feels like a distant dream. It begins to feel possible. But if belief is only the first chain, then what are the others? What hidden forces keep human beings walking in circles long after they have forgotten why they began? And why do so many people defend the very structures that limit them? The answers lie deeper than most imagine. For beneath belief waits another layer of the prison. A force so subtle that it shapes nearly every decision, every fear, and every desire without announcing its presence. And that is where our journey must go next. Chapter 4. The Blindfold of Certainty. There is a strange habit deeply rooted in human nature. People often prefer a comforting answer to an honest question. They would rather stand upon a borrowed certainty than walk through the uncertainty of discovery. And because of this, they frequently mistake belief for understanding. They mistake repetition for truth. They mistake inheritance for wisdom. Yet truth has never belonged to inheritance. Truth belongs only to those who are willing to see. Imagine a child standing beneath the night sky for the very first time. The stars stretch endlessly above. Mystery surrounds them. Wonder fills their eyes. Questions arise naturally. What is all this? Where did it come from? What lies beyond it? The child begins as a seeker. Every human being begins as a seeker. But very soon something happens. Answers arrive before understanding. Conclusions arrive before inquiry. Beliefs arrive before experience. And slowly the living flame of wonder begins to shrink. Not because the child has discovered truth. But because the child has been told what truth is supposed to be. Throughout history, humanity has built countless temples, churches, shrines, and sacred structures. Every civilization has done it. Every culture has done it. Each has declared that somewhere within these walls the sacred can be found. Yet a curious question remains. If the sacred is infinite, how can it be confined? If the universe fills every corner of existence, why must it be limited to a particular building? If the divine breathes through every living thing, why should it need a special address? Look around carefully. The stars shine without asking permission. The oceans move without belonging to any religion. The wind touches every face without discrimination. The trees grow without consulting scripture. The sunrise visits every land. The night sky covers every nation. Existence itself appears to be one vast temple. Every river, every mountain, every bird, every human face, every moment of awareness. And yet people often overlook the immeasurable sanctuary surrounding them while searching for the sacred inside walls they have constructed themselves. This is not because the sacred is absent. It is because the eyes have been trained to look in particular directions. When someone is told from childhood that truth exists only in a certain place, they stop looking elsewhere. When someone is told that wisdom belongs only to a particular book, they stop examining life itself. When someone is told that answers have already been found, they stop asking questions. And the moment questioning ends, growth begins to slow. This is where belief becomes dangerous. Not because every belief is false, but because belief can create the illusion of knowledge. A person who truly does not know remains open. A person who believes they already know becomes closed. The first continues searching. The second stops. And truth reveals itself only to those who continue searching. For centuries people have been encouraged to believe. Believe this. Believe that. Believe without questioning. Believe without investigating. Believe because others believe. Believe because authority says so. Believe because tradition demands it. The message changes its clothing from culture to culture, but its essence remains the same. Trust the answer. Do not examine it. Accept it. Do not challenge it. And whenever belief is threatened, fear is often introduced. Fear is one of the oldest tools of control. People are told that questioning is dangerous. That doubt is sinful. That uncertainty is weakness. That inquiry leads to disaster. Sometimes they are promised rewards for obedience. Sometimes they are threatened with punishment for disobedience. One path leads to paradise. The other leads to suffering. Thus fear and desire become silent guards protecting the prison of belief. The tragedy is that fear can make almost anything appear true. A frightened mind does not investigate. It obeys. A frightened mind does not explore. It retreats. A frightened mind does not discover. It clings. And because of this, generations of people have accepted conclusions they never personally examined. Not because they were convinced, but because they were conditioned. Consider a simple question. How much genuine transformation has blind belief produced? For thousands of years humanity has been instructed to accept doctrines, creeds, and conclusions. Generation after generation has been taught what to think. Yet where is the evidence that unquestioning belief has brought humanity closer to wisdom? If belief alone were enough, the world would already be overflowing with enlightened people. Fear would have disappeared. Violence would have vanished. Division would have ended. But the evidence points elsewhere. The same conflicts continue. The same confusion remains. The same suffering repeats itself. Perhaps the problem lies not in what people believe. Perhaps the problem lies in belief itself. Belief asks for acceptance before experience. Truth asks for experience before acceptance. Belief says, trust the map. Truth says, walk the territory. Belief says, someone else has already seen. Truth says, open your own eyes. This difference changes everything. Because second-hand certainty can never replace first-hand understanding. Imagine two people discussing the ocean. One has spent years reading books about it. The other has stood at its shore. One can describe it. The other has experienced it. Their knowledge is not the same. And when it comes to the deepest questions of existence, experience matters far more than description. No book can substitute for seeing. No doctrine can substitute for discovery. No borrowed conclusion can substitute for direct realization. This is why genuine seekers begin with a remarkable act of honesty. They admit what they do not know. This sounds simple. Yet it may be one of the most difficult things a human being can do. The ego prefers certainty. It wants answers. It wants conclusions. It wants security. To say, "I do not know," feels uncomfortable. But it is precisely from that discomfort that wisdom begins. A person who admits ignorance remains available to truth. A person who pretends to know closes the door. The seeker says, "I do not know. Let me investigate." The believer says, "I already know." And the journey ends before it has begun. Most people never realize how much courage is required to stand in uncertainty. To admit that the greatest mysteries remain unsolved. To acknowledge that reality may be far larger than inherited explanations. To remain open. To remain curious. To remain available. Yet every genuine discovery in human history began exactly there. Not with certainty. But with wonder. Not with conclusions. But with questions. The great explorers of consciousness have always understood this. They did not begin with answers. They began with astonishment. They looked at existence and confessed, "There is something here I do not yet understand." And because they remained open, new horizons became visible. The moment certainty disappeared, exploration began. This is why doubt is not the enemy of truth. Blind belief is. Doubt, when used intelligently, becomes a doorway. It protects us from illusion. It prevents premature conclusions. It keeps the mind awake. The purpose of doubt is not to destroy truth. The purpose of doubt is to remove what is false so that truth can reveal itself. Gold survives the fire. Only the impurities burn away. A person who never doubts remains vulnerable to deception. A person who questions begins developing vision. And vision is the beginning of freedom. Because every prison depends upon unconscious acceptance. The moment awareness enters, the prison begins to weaken. The moment questioning begins, the walls start to crack. The moment direct experience becomes more important than borrowed belief, transformation becomes possible. So the issue is not whether the universe exists. The issue is whether we truly know. The issue is not whether ultimate reality is present. The issue is whether we have seen it ourselves. And until we have, honesty demands a simple admission. I do not know. Strangely enough, that admission is not a defeat. It is the beginning of intelligence. It is the beginning of inquiry. It is the beginning of wisdom. For every authentic journey starts in the same place. Not with certainty. Not with belief. But with the courage to stand before the unknown. And when that courage appears, a new kind of freedom becomes possible. The freedom not to believe. The freedom not to pretend. The freedom to seek. The freedom to discover. And that freedom opens the door to the next and perhaps most subtle chain of all. The deep fear that arises whenever old certainties begin to crumble and the unknown starts calling us forward. Chapter 5. The courage to be yourself. The first prison was belief. The second was imitation. One teaches a person what to think. The other teaches a person what to become. Together they form a remarkably powerful system. First people are told what is true. Then they are told who they should be. And somewhere in between, they lose contact with themselves. In the previous chapter, we discovered that belief can become a blindfold. When people accept answers before experience, their search comes to an end before it has truly begun. But another danger follows closely behind. Even when a person begins questioning inherited beliefs, they often continue carrying another burden. The burden of trying to become someone else. And this burden has imprisoned humanity for centuries. The moment doubt awakens, curiosity is born. And curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in existence. It creates movement. It opens doors. It pushes consciousness toward unexplored territories. Every discovery in human history began with a question. Every breakthrough began with uncertainty. Every genuine insight emerged because someone was willing to say, "I do not know." Those 4 words may be among the most liberating words a human being can speak. Because the moment we admit our ignorance, the journey begins. A person who believes they already know has nowhere to go. A person who recognizes their ignorance suddenly has an entire universe to explore. Questions arise. Investigation begins. Attention sharpens. Awareness deepens. And gradually life starts revealing its secrets. Not because answers were handed down from above, but because the seeker became available to discovery. This is why genuine inquiry is so different from belief. Belief wants certainty. Inquiry wants understanding. Belief settles. Inquiry moves. Belief closes the door. Inquiry opens it. And every great explorer of truth has understood this distinction. They did not begin with conclusions. They began with wonder. They carried questions, not answers. And because they carried questions, life itself became their teacher. Yet even after escaping the prison of belief, many people fall into another trap. They begin following. Someone tells them, "Be like this person. Live like that person. Walk the path they walked. Become what they became." And suddenly a new prison appears. Perhaps more respectable than the first. Perhaps more subtle. But a prison nonetheless. For thousands of years, humanity has been taught through examples. Become like this saint. Become like that prophet. Become like this enlightened master. Become like that great leader. The names change with time. One generation is told to become like a spiritual teacher. Another generation is told to become like a revolutionary. Another is told to become like a celebrity, entrepreneur, or hero. But the message remains unchanged. Do not become yourself. Become someone else. Pause for a moment and consider how strange this is. Has there ever been a second Buddha? A second Socrates? A second Leonardo? A second Einstein? A second Christ? History answers clearly. No. Not one. Not because people failed to imitate them. Millions tried. But because life does not create copies. Life creates originals. The universe appears to have no interest in repetition. Every sunrise is unique. Every snowflake is different. Every tree grows according to its own pattern. Every face carries a design never seen before and never to be repeated again. Existence behaves less like a factory and more like an artist. An artist who never repeats the same painting twice. An artist who delights in uniqueness. An artist whose creativity is endless. Yet human society often moves in the opposite direction. It rewards conformity. It rewards similarity. It rewards imitation. From childhood people are compared. Compared with siblings. Compared with classmates. Compared with neighbors. Compared with heroes. Compared with impossible standards. And through constant comparison they begin believing that who they are is somehow insufficient. That they must become someone else before they can be worthy. This creates a deep inner conflict. Because the soul wants authenticity. But conditioning demands imitation. One voice says, Discover yourself. Another says, replace yourself. And between those two voices, countless people spend their lives divided. Imagine an oak tree trying to become a rose. Or a river trying to become a mountain. The attempt would be absurd. Yet human beings do something similar every day. They reject their own nature and struggle to become what they were never meant to be. And because the goal is impossible, frustration becomes inevitable. No matter how hard a river tries, it will never become a mountain. No matter how hard a mountain tries, it will never become a river. Each fulfills its purpose by becoming itself. Not by becoming something else. The same principle applies to human life. Every individual carries a unique possibility. A unique intelligence. A unique rhythm. A unique path. And the greatest tragedy is not failure. The greatest tragedy is abandoning that uniqueness in order to imitate another. Because imitation may produce appearance, but it cannot produce authenticity. A person can imitate kindness without being kind. A person can imitate wisdom without being wise. A person can imitate courage without being courageous. Performance is easy. Transformation is difficult. And society often confuses the two. Consider an actor playing the role of a king. On stage he appears powerful. He wears the clothing. He speaks the words. He performs the gestures. To the audience he may look convincing. But beneath the costume he remains himself. The appearance changes. The reality does not. In the same way, people often spend their lives performing identities. They wear masks. They adopt behaviors. They imitate ideals. They memorize roles. And eventually they forget that they are acting. The tragedy of imitation is not merely that it is false. The tragedy is that it separates a person from their own center. The real self remains hidden. The performed self occupies the surface. And between them a tension develops. A conflict. A quiet struggle that never ends. Because the truth constantly seeks expression. And no performance, however convincing, can permanently silence it. This is why so many people feel exhausted. Not because life is demanding. But because pretending is demanding. Maintaining a mask requires energy. Protecting an image requires effort. Sustaining an illusion requires constant attention. Authenticity, on the other hand, requires no effort at all. A rose does not struggle to be a rose. A star does not struggle to shine. A river does not struggle to flow. They simply express what they are. Perhaps this explains why moments of genuine authenticity feel so liberating. In those moments the conflict disappears. The division ends. The actor leaves the stage. And for a brief time, the individual becomes whole. Not perfect. Not superior. Simply real. The irony is that the people we admire most were rarely imitators. The great innovators did not become great by copying. The great artists did not become great by conforming. The great spiritual explorers did not become great by repeating. They became remarkable because they were courageous enough to be themselves. Their originality was their contribution. Their uniqueness was their gift. And what inspired others was not imitation. It was authenticity. This is why no genuine teacher wants followers. A true teacher wants explorers. A true teacher points toward freedom, not dependence. A true teacher encourages awareness, not imitation. The purpose of wisdom is not to create copies. It is to awaken individuality. Not to produce followers. But to help people discover their own path. The moment you begin comparing yourself to another person, you move away from yourself. The moment you begin understanding yourself, comparison loses its power. For there is no competition in uniqueness. There is only expression. There is only unfolding. There is only becoming. And perhaps this is the hidden meaning behind all growth. Not becoming somebody else. Not achieving another identity. Not wearing a more impressive mask. But discovering what already exists within. Allowing it to emerge. Allowing it to flower. Allowing it to become visible. The first prison taught us to trust borrowed answers. The second teaches us to trust borrowed identities. Freedom begins when both are abandoned. When a person no longer needs second-hand truths. When a person no longer needs second-hand lives. When a person becomes willing to stand alone before existence and discover directly who they are. Yet this is only the beginning. For even after belief dissolves and imitation falls away, another obstacle remains. A deeper obstacle. One hidden beneath both. The fear that if we stop believing what we were told and stop becoming who others expect us to be, we may not know who we are at all. And that fear guards the entrance to the next and most important stage of our journey. Chapter 6. The Prison of Imitation. There is a strange danger hidden within admiration. At first, admiration appears beautiful. We see someone wise, courageous, creative, or awakened, and something within us is inspired. We feel drawn toward greatness. We feel called toward a higher possibility. But somewhere along the way, admiration often turns into imitation. And the moment that happens, inspiration becomes a prison. In the previous chapter, we discovered how belief can blind the mind. A borrowed certainty prevents genuine discovery. But there is another chain that binds human beings just as deeply. The desire to become someone else. The desire to copy. The desire to imitate. And this desire has quietly stolen countless lives. Not through violence. Not through force. But through comparison. Imagine an actor who spends years playing the role of a king. Every gesture is practiced. Every word is rehearsed. Every expression is perfected. Eventually the performance becomes flawless. So flawless that audiences begin believing he truly is a king. One day the performance becomes so convincing that even the actor begins forgetting the difference between the role and the person. Yet no matter how perfect the performance becomes, something remains missing. The actor may look like a king. He may sound like a king. He may convince everyone around him. But he still remains an actor. The appearance changes. The reality does not. This is one of the great tragedies of human life. Many people spend years perfecting performances. They learn how to appear spiritual. How to appear successful. How to appear wise. How to appear enlightened. Yet appearance and reality are not the same thing. In fact, the better the performance becomes, the easier it is to forget the truth. A curious thing about authentic people is that they make mistakes. They stumble. They hesitate. They learn. They grow. Life surprises them because they are alive. A performance, however, makes very few mistakes. It follows a script. It repeats rehearsed patterns. It behaves exactly as expected. This is why truly living people often seem imperfect, while imitators appear polished. But polish is not life. Perfection is not authenticity. There is an old story that illustrates this beautifully. A celebration was once organized in honor of a famous comedian. As part of the festivities, a competition was announced. People from different places were invited to imitate him. Hundreds participated. Each studied his movements. His expressions. His mannerisms. His voice. They practiced endlessly. Then something unexpected happened. The comedian himself secretly entered the contest. After all, who could imitate him better than he could? The result astonished everyone. He did not win first place. Someone else did. The real person lost to an imitation. The story sounds amusing. Yet it reveals something profound. A copy can sometimes become more convincing than the original. An imitation can become more polished than reality. But no matter how convincing it appears, it remains an imitation. The fragrance is missing. The life is missing. The living source is missing. The same thing happens in spiritual life. People spend centuries trying to become another Buddha, another Christ, another Krishna, another Lao Tzu, another Mahavira. Yet none succeed. Not because they lack effort, but because existence never creates duplicates. The universe does not repeat itself. Every person arrives carrying a possibility that has never existed before. And once they disappear, that possibility disappears forever. Look at a forest. No two leaves are identical. No two trees express themselves in exactly the same way. Each grows according to its own design, its own rhythm, its own intelligence. The forest is beautiful precisely because of its diversity. Imagine if every tree suddenly decided to imitate one particular tree. The forest would lose its beauty, its creativity, its vitality. Life celebrates uniqueness. Only human beings have been taught to abandon it. From childhood we are trained to compare. Be like your brother. Be like your sister. Be like this student. Be like that leader. Be like this saint. Be like that hero. The message is always the same. Do not become yourself. Become somebody else. And because this message is repeated constantly, people begin believing that who they are is not enough. This belief creates endless suffering. Because no matter how hard a person tries, they cannot become another individual. A rose cannot become a lotus. A lotus cannot become a cedar tree. A river cannot become a mountain. Every attempt to become something else moves a person further away from their own nature. And yet millions continue trying. Imagine entering a garden and instructing every flower to imitate another. Tell the rose to become a lily. Tell the lily to become a sunflower. Tell the sunflower to become a jasmine blossom. What would happen? Nothing would bloom. The rose would waste its energy trying to become what it can never be. The lily would abandon its own nature. The sunflower would lose contact with its own roots. The garden would become barren. Not because the flowers lacked potential, but because they rejected their own uniqueness. Humanity suffers from the same problem. The world is filled with people attempting to become someone else. As a result, they never discover who they truly are. Their energy is consumed by comparison. Their attention is consumed by imitation. Their life becomes divided. One part trying to be authentic. The other trying to perform. This division creates an inner conflict. A person begins living two lives. One life is real. The other is artificial. One belongs to the soul. The other belongs to the image. One seeks expression. The other seeks approval. And because these two directions oppose each other, the individual becomes exhausted. The great individuals of history did not become extraordinary through imitation. They became extraordinary because they trusted their own experience, their own intelligence, their own inquiry. They followed their own path. That is why they became unique. That is why their lives still inspire us. The irony is that people admire them for their originality and then attempt to imitate them. In doing so, they miss the very lesson those individuals embodied. A truly awakened teacher never wants followers. Followers create dependence. Dependence creates imitation. Imitation destroys individuality. A true teacher wants creators. Explorers. Independent minds. A true teacher does not say, "Become me." A true teacher says, "Discover yourself." This is the difference between religion and religiousness. Religion often creates followers. Religiousness creates free individuals. Religion creates systems. Religiousness creates awareness. Religion asks for conformity. Religiousness encourages discovery. One produces copies. The other produces originals. The deepest flowering in life happens when a person stops comparing themselves to others. Not because they become arrogant. Not because they become isolated. But because they finally begin listening to their own inner voice. The voice that existed before society spoke. The voice that existed before comparison began. The voice that has been waiting patiently beneath layers of conditioning. The rose reaches fulfillment by becoming a perfect rose. Not by becoming a lotus. The river reaches the ocean by flowing as a river. Not by trying to become a mountain. And a human being reaches fulfillment by becoming fully themselves. Not by becoming somebody else. This is the hidden secret behind all authentic growth. The goal is not transformation into another person. The goal is the unfolding of your own potential. The goal is not imitation. The goal is realization. Not becoming different. But becoming complete. When belief disappears, the mind becomes free to question. When imitation disappears, the soul becomes free to express itself. And when both chains are broken, something remarkable begins to happen. For the first time, a person stands face to face with their own being. Not as a follower. Not as a believer. But as an explorer. An explorer of truth. An explorer of consciousness. An explorer of life itself. And this is where genuine spirituality begins. Not in becoming another Buddha. Not in becoming another Christ. Not in becoming another enlightened figure from history. But in becoming the fullest expression of yourself. For existence has already produced Buddhas. It has already produced Christs. It has already produced sages and saints. What it has never produced before is you. And what it waits to see is whether you have the courage to become fully, authentically, and beautifully yourself. For beyond belief and beyond imitation lies a deeper freedom still. The freedom of discovering one's own nature. And that is where the next stage of our journey begins. Chapter 7. The chains we forge ourselves. Throughout this journey, we have been examining prisons. Not the prisons built from stone. Not the prisons guarded by soldiers. Not the prisons that lock away the body. We have been exploring prisons far more powerful. Prisons built from belief. Prisons built from imitation. Prisons built from fear. Prisons built from unconscious habits of the mind. And perhaps the most surprising discovery is this. No one else can keep us imprisoned unless we participate in our own imprisonment. The bars may come from outside. But the attachment to the bars comes from within. A truly religious mind is not a mind that merely bows before sacred buildings. It is not a mind that carries holy books beneath its arm. It is not a mind that repeats borrowed prayers. Nor is it a mind that proudly wears a particular label. A religious mind is something entirely different. It is a mind that continuously becomes freer. A consciousness that refuses to nourish bondage. A consciousness that questions every chain. A consciousness that remains available to truth. Whether truth confirms old beliefs or destroys them. Most people think religion is something added. A ritual added. A doctrine added. A practice added. A belief added. But perhaps authentic spirituality begins with subtraction. Removing illusions. Removing borrowed identities. Removing fear. Removing false certainties. Removing everything that prevents the natural flowering of consciousness. A gardener understands this principle. Before planting new seeds, the soil must be prepared. Weeds must be removed. Dead roots must be cleared away. Stones must be carried aside. Old debris must be cleaned from the ground. Only then can new life emerge. Only then can seeds find space to grow. Only then can hidden potential become visible. The same principle applies to human transformation. People often want enlightenment without self-examination. Freedom without responsibility. Growth without change. Blooming without preparation. Yet life does not work that way. A field crowded with weeds cannot nourish flowers. A mind crowded with illusions cannot easily discover truth. Something must first be cleared away. Something must first be understood. Something must first be released. That has been the purpose of these chapters. Not to provide answers. Not to hand you a new system of belief. Not to offer another cage decorated with beautiful words. But to loosen old chains. To create space. To prepare the inner ground. Because only in prepared soil can understanding take root. Every human being enters this world carrying a hidden possibility. A seed. A unique potential. A fragrance waiting to emerge. Yet many leave the world without ever discovering it. They survive. They achieve. They accumulate. They compete. They struggle. But they never truly bloom. And a life that never blooms leaves with a certain incompleteness. A certain sadness. A sense that something essential remained unrealized. Existence offers every person an extraordinary opportunity. The opportunity to become fully alive. To discover the vastness hidden within. To experience a depth beyond fear. To encounter a peace beyond circumstance. To taste a joy that does not depend upon possession or success. But this opportunity requires courage. Because flowering demands transformation. And transformation demands freedom. Think again of the river we encountered earlier. The river never reaches the ocean by remaining attached to its source. It must move. It must travel. It must leave familiar territory. It must pass through uncertainty. Mountains. Valleys. Storms. Dark forests. Unknown landscapes. Only then does it finally discover the sea for which it has always been longing. Human beings are no different. Something within us longs for vastness. Something within us seeks wholeness. Something within us searches for a deeper belonging. Call it truth. Call it awakening. Call it the universe. Call it by any name you wish. Names matter little. The longing itself is what matters. And every heart carries it. Yet longing alone is not enough. The parrot longed for freedom. Still it clung to its cage. The river longs for the ocean. But imagine if it built walls around itself. Imagine if it became afraid of movement. Imagine if it preferred safety to discovery. The ocean would remain forever unreachable. The same is true for us. We often desire transformation while protecting the very structures that prevent it. We desire freedom while strengthening our chains. We desire truth while defending our illusions. We desire peace while nourishing our conflicts. And because of this contradiction, life becomes complicated. Not because freedom is difficult, but because attachment is. The moment a person begins observing honestly, an astonishing realization emerges. Many of the chains they blame on others were forged by themselves. Many of the prisons they condemn were built with their own cooperation. Many of the limitations they struggle against are maintained by unconscious habits. This realization can be painful. But it is also liberating. Because what we create, we can also dissolve. An old story illustrates this beautifully. Many centuries ago, there lived a master blacksmith whose reputation spread throughout an empire. His craftsmanship was unmatched. Merchants traveled great distances to purchase his work. Kings admired his skill. His name became synonymous with excellence. He spent decades forging the strongest chains anyone had ever seen. His pride rested upon their strength, their durability, their perfection. Then war arrived. Invaders conquered the city. The most respected citizens were captured. Among them was the blacksmith himself. Heavy chains were locked around their wrists and ankles. The prisoners were dragged away and abandoned far from civilization. The others wept. Despair consumed them. Death seemed inevitable. But the blacksmith remained calm. He even smiled. For who could understand chains better than he? Surely he could free himself. Surely no iron could defeat the man who had mastered iron. As soon as he was thrown into a rocky ravine, he examined the chains. He searched for weak points, loose joints, hidden flaws. He expected to discover an escape. Instead, a terrible realization struck him. The chains carried a familiar mark. A signature. His signature. They were his own creation. Everything changed in that instant. The confidence vanished. The smile disappeared. For he knew exactly how strong those chains were. He had made them strong. That was the source of his reputation. That was the reason others admired him. The chains were doing exactly what they had been designed to do. And now the craftsman found himself imprisoned by his own craftsmanship. There are moments in life when every human being encounters a similar revelation. A moment when they suddenly see the truth. The beliefs they carry. The fears they protect. The identities they defend. The habits they repeat. The prisons they inhabit. Many of them bear their own signature. They helped create them. They strengthened them. They protected them. Sometimes they even celebrated them. At first this realization feels devastating. But hidden within it is a profound gift. Because the chains we create can also be dismantled. The prisons we build can be abandoned. The illusions we construct can be seen through. Awareness becomes the key. Understanding becomes the hammer. Courage becomes the doorway. The moment a person stops blaming and starts seeing, transformation begins. No longer a victim. No longer a follower. No longer a prisoner. But an awakening consciousness. A being capable of choosing differently. A being capable of stepping beyond old patterns. A being capable of discovering what lies beyond fear. This has been the purpose of everything we have explored so far. To help reveal the chains. To expose the prisons. To loosen the grip of conditioning. To prepare the soil for something new. For once the old structures begin to fall away, a different question emerges. Not, what is imprisoning me? But, what is waiting to be born within me once the prison disappears? That question marks the beginning of a new journey. A deeper journey. A more beautiful journey. For freedom is not the final destination. Freedom is only the opening of the gate. Beyond the gate lies the flowering of consciousness itself. Beyond the gate lies the discovery of what a human being can become when nothing false remains. And beyond the gate lies the mystery we must explore next. The mystery of inner awakening. The first glimpse of the vast and living reality that has been patiently waiting behind every chain. Epilogue. The open sky. We have traveled a long way together. Not across continents. Not across oceans. But through landscapes that are far more difficult to explore. The landscapes within. The hidden territories of belief. The silent prisons of imitation. The invisible chains of fear. The walls we inherited. The walls we built ourselves. And perhaps the most surprising discovery of all is that the journey was never really about escaping the world. It was about awakening within it. Throughout these pages, we encountered many prisons. Some were obvious. Others were subtle. Some were created by society. Others were maintained by our own unconscious habits. But every prison shared one thing in common. It depended upon our participation. The cage could exist only as long as we continued holding its bars. The moment awareness appeared, something began to change. The moment seeing began, freedom became possible. Perhaps you noticed that this book never attempted to give you a new belief. It never asked you to join a system. It never asked you to follow a doctrine. It never asked you to become somebody else. Because every borrowed answer eventually becomes another cage. And every imitation eventually becomes another form of bondage. Truth cannot be inherited. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be memorized. It can only be discovered. The greatest mistake human beings make is believing that freedom is something they will find someday. Somewhere else. After one more achievement. One more possession. One more success. One more answer. Yet freedom has never belonged to the future. Freedom begins the moment a person sees clearly. The moment they stop pretending. The moment they stop running. The moment they stop living according to borrowed maps. The river does not become fulfilled by dreaming of the ocean. It becomes fulfilled by flowing. The seed does not become a flower by imagining spring. It becomes a flower by opening. And a human being does not discover truth by collecting beliefs. They discover truth by becoming available to experience. By remaining awake. By remaining curious. By remaining alive. Perhaps there is no greater courage than the courage to be yourself. Not the self created by expectation. Not the self created by comparison. Not the self created by fear. But the deeper self that exists beneath all conditioning. The self that has been quietly waiting since the beginning. The self that no teacher can give you. The self that no authority can define. The self that can only be discovered through direct living. If there is one thing worth remembering after closing this book, it is this. You were never born to become a copy. You were never born to spend your life inside invisible prisons. You were never born merely to repeat what others have already lived. You were born with the possibility of flowering into something unique. Something that has never existed before. And will never exist again. The universe does not create duplicates. It creates originals. Every star shines differently. Every river follows its own course. Every tree grows according to its own design. And every human being carries a possibility that belongs to them alone. The tragedy is not failing to become extraordinary. The tragedy is never discovering who you truly are. Perhaps that is what spirituality has always been about. Not becoming more religious. Not becoming more respectable. Not becoming more acceptable. But becoming more real. More conscious. More awake. More available to the mystery of existence. And now we arrive at the end. Or rather, at the place that appears to be the end. Because no book can complete this journey for you. No author can walk it for you. No teacher can finish it on your behalf. The real journey begins the moment the listening ends. The real journey begins when these words become observation. When observation becomes awareness. When awareness becomes transformation. Somewhere beyond belief. Beyond imitation. Beyond fear. Beyond every prison of the mind. An open sky is waiting. It has always been there. Patient. Silent. Unchanged. Waiting for the bird to discover that the cage door was never truly locked. Waiting for the river to trust its movement toward the sea. Waiting for the flower to unfold into its fragrance. Waiting for you. So walk gently. Question courageously. Live authentically. Remain curious. And whenever life presents you with another invisible cage, remember. The sky has always been larger. And freedom has always been closer than it appeared. May your journey continue. May your awareness deepen. May your life flower fully. And may you discover, through your own experience, the vast and living mystery that has been calling you since the beginning.